This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, so here we go. So good morning, everybody. I know we have some folks on the call. I know we'll have some more join in here in a little bit. But thank you so much to Joan Hightower, from the Executive Director of United Way of Etowah County. If you don't know Joan, then you have not been anywhere near United Way. Joan's been there for a long time. We appreciate you taking your time this morning, Joan, to come talk to everyone about managing crisis during this pandemic for nonprofits. Appreciate you taking the time for this. Do need to recognize our sponsor of the Chamber Council on Nonprofits. This is our second nonprofit council of 2020. Gerald Pentecost, local CPA, has sponsored this series. So if you see Gerald, tell him thank you for sponsoring these series. If it wasn't for our sponsors, we couldn't have these and couldn't provide these to you guys. So let me go ahead and pop out of the screen here and pull up the presentation for us. Okay, so there's the presentation. So with no further ado, Joan, you want to take it away?
Yeah, I want to welcome everybody today. It's really good to be back in a United Way seat where I could excuse me, work with the community. You don't know how good it is to see everybody. Will, I can't see everybody's faces on those screens. I can just see an initial. Is there any way we can show their faces?
Yeah, they have to select that themselves. So if you happen to be on your cell phone, laptop, whatever it may be, if you like to, make sure you turn on the webcam so we can see you. We want to see you guys.
Yeah. If I had to get up and curl my hair today, so do y'all. Yeah, they have to be on the video. It's a whole lot easier to present to a face than to present to initials. Thank you, Jessica. I know you're at home with that hair pulled back. I see that, yes. If Will and I have to, then y'all do too. I do want to welcome everybody. And all I see are initials on the screen right now. I can see Jessica and Tammy, and I know Kay is on there. Who else do we have on the call today?
Looks like we've got Emily Carter, I think Emma Hazelwood, Jennifer Grace, Leslie Stevens from our office, Lynn Curry, Kay Moore, Miranda Farrell, Ruth Moffitt, and I'm assuming Tammy Jackson. So this says Tammy.
Yes, she's on there. I see there. Okay, good. I'm going to have to make sure. Normally, when I am doing a class or something, you won't believe this, but I just go off the off the top of my head. But today I'm going to keep referring to mine, make sure I go over what I need to go over, because you all know I can get out on a rabbit trail. Jessica's laughing right now, and I won't ever come back if I get off on the rabbit trail. So we're going to talk about managing in a crisis, but really it's much broader than that. You don't manage in a crisis with COVID. I mean, a crisis is a crisis. Everyone is different, but you still have the elements. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, because many of you have managed through different types of crisis before. And one of the things I was thinking about as I started working on this is, many of you remember the tornado that came through in 2011 with Tuscaloosa, and then it came here, it hit Silver Lakes. Well, in Marshall County, when that tornado came through, they not only didn't have power, they didn't have phone service. So imagine all of you managing your agencies without your cell phones and your laptops. And if you did want to charge them, you had to get in your car and drive around. Well, guess what doesn't work if you don't have any electricity? The gas pumps. So they drove down here to Etowah County, and many of them drove to a gas station near my old neighborhood, drove and filled up with gas and charged their phones or whatever on their way back home. So there's a lot of things to think about in a crisis. This one is more, medical than the other one, but it's still the same thought process. And that's what I'm going to make sure we go through today. Next slide, Will, and I think I didn't tell you to turn the next slide. 6 items for managing crisis. And I want to tell you right now, don't laugh at me, Jessica and Ruth, but actually there's 5, because I put work of the board twice. So there's no denying that I can type really fast. It's just not right. So that's what we're going to look at today. Many times when you're in a crisis, if you're managing the crisis, you're going to question every decision you do. As a matter of fact, during COVID, Well, should I go ahead and close the office? Well, we don't need to close the office. Well, I need to close the office. You go back and forth in your mind. You might not share those questions, right decision, but if you're a manager, you've certainly got them. And how does this affect the staff when you go back to work? Those are some of the bigger questions we'll look at, because if you get used to doing something at home, when you don't have to get your clothes on until 10 o'clock, that's not true when your office opens back up. So we'll look at some of those. The most complicated, I think, not the most complicated, one of the most important is communication. We'll look at that. There's more things to just communicating one-on-one. We'll look at your continuity of operations. I hope that all of you have those for your nonprofit. If not, I'll tell you where you can get one of those. You want to continue the work of the board, because your board is in charge of your organization. They may have their own crisis going on. Then you always have to look at finance. If you could raise your hand right now, worried about your finances at your nonprofit, everybody is, because it changes when your organization is not open to the public. And then you have to have a plan for returning to normal, because all of a sudden, if you're not getting dressed before 10 and you're in the office before 8, you've got to change some of the ways that you're doing. And how are you just going to open up all at once? Or are you going to ease into it? And of course, number 6 is, we've already got that listed. So next slide. Communication, I think, is one of the most important items, whether you're profit or not profit, or no matter what you are. It's so important, because number one, your board doesn't like to be surprised if you don't communicate with them. And your staff, if you're not communicating with your staff, they fill in with the worst case scenario every single time. And if all of you were not muted, you would say, yes, they do. I do. If I don't know what's going on with anything in my life, you fill in with the worst case scenario if you don't have the answer. So let's look at communications with your staff. If you're in a crisis, your staff wants to know, what are we going to do? How are we going to do it? How's this going to work? In this situation, most of us went to work from home. So if you're going to work from home, then do you have a cell phone? Do you have a laptop? I have a Mac computer at home, and I quickly learned that when it wasn't in crisis, that served my purpose as well. It was my personal computer. But when we went to this crisis working from home, yesterday I was on 4 webinars. Well, my Mac is not always compatible with the other programs that people are using, and I would have to, in the middle of it, get off and get on my cell phone. Well, that's different when you've got your picture. Then you have to hold your cell phone in a certain way. So does your staff have the things that it needs for you to communicate? We started using, after we started working from home, Microsoft Teams. It's a cool thing. And if you've got Microsoft, you can just add Teams to it. You can go in, once you set up your group, which my group was our staff that was going to be on calls, and you just call straight from the app. You can chat. You don't have to set up any kind of outside software. You can share documents through OneNote that you're working on. And so that Microsoft Teams has been a big help for us, and we hadn't used that before. So you might want to look into that. Are you going to work from home? We have a lot of outside workers. Christy and Ruth work outside. I work outside. Christy works Emily works outside the office. But our folks don't work from home. Most companies don't allow hourly workers to work from home, because most of their jobs involve something that has to be done in the office. Well, a lot of us, even on this call, we're not in our office all the time, because for one thing, if we're in our office all the time, we're not fundraising. You have to be out in the community. But you also have people that are maybe hourly people that their job is to handle everything while we're gone. Well, that's not conducive to working from home. But all of a sudden during COVID, you need them to work from home and handle things for you. So for instance, and I'll just use our office as an example. Our admin doesn't get a phone stipend like everybody else that works outside the office. Well, if we're requiring her to text and email with us and she's hourly, we need to give her a phone stipend that month, just like we do the people that work outside the office. So she can communicate with us because there's things that we need to have done and we need to have her to do. So do you have the tools that you need to communicate? Also with your staff, you might need a way to communicate one-on-one. Sometimes we FaceTime with that. Sometimes you can do the Microsoft Team. You can do Zoom, you can do GoToMeeting, but you've got one-on-one communication and you've got group communication, and those may be different things that you're with. You also need to communicate with the media, because one of the things that's going to happen is people want to know the Gadsden Times, maybe the radios, if you do a lot of work with that. I ask you, and they're going to print who's closed, who's open, what's going on with all that. So you need to communicate with the media. Most of us communicate highly on Facebook. It's amazing to me how much information we can get across with Facebook that's more productive than just about anything that we do. We also, and a lot of you use Constant Contact. Does anyone, and when you answer, unmute yourself, does anybody have any other forms of communication that are very effective for their agency? Because I definitely want this to be interactive. No other forms of communication? Does everybody use Constant Contact as a free email way to contact?
Ruth says Zoom.
Zoom, yep. Yeah, Ruth was a Zoomer before anybody was Zooming. Tammy says MailChimp. Unmute yourself, Tammy. What is MailChimp?
MailChimp is another email service, just like Constant Contact.
Okay, is it free to nonprofits?
It is.
Okay, good. Okay, so that's a resource for you that you may not know about. You also need to look at your board members. How do they want to be contacted? I have board members that just contact me through text. If they've got anything they need to tell me, it's through text. And many times your board members are working their own jobs and they're after hours. So a lot of my texts from board members don't come from 8 to 4 or 8 to 5 or during the day. It may come when they're finished. But you need to let your board know. And let me give you an example of this. Number one, board members don't like to be surprised about anything. They're not in charge of your day-to-day operations, but they are in charge of your organization, and they need to be on board before you take any actions like closing your office. You know, that's pretty important. Now, I tell you, it went the opposite way with our board. I had decided we were going to just work in the office because everybody has separate offices and you automatically are social distanced. And so we were going to close the office to the public, but keep it open for the staff, because you're looking at Ruth taking 3 times the call volume for 211, and she has hourly workers that are at the office. So we thought that was pretty good. The board came back and said, no, we want everybody home. We don't want any of you at the office. So what we had initially decided to do, the board was not comfortable with us doing. They were not comfortable with the possibility that anybody might get sick because they were just in the office together. So board members want to be involved, and that's probably not true for 100% of your board members, but it's true for a big percentage of them. Also, how are you going to meet with your board? If your board needs to approve your finances, your minutes, and they approve whatever is going on that you're going to do, you may need to they may need to approve a change in your budget because now you're going in a completely different direction working from home. How are you going to meet with them? Is it going to be Zoom? Is it going to be GoToMeeting? It's generally not Microsoft Teams because that's your in-house group, but you need sure that they're comfortable with that. And I tell you, Tammy Jackson sent out a very good email to the board last week when they met on explaining everything. I didn't do that very first time we had a meeting with our board, and we had so many questions about people getting on. We had one board member that doesn't really want to download any of that software to his or her computers and phones. And so they went in and borrowed another phone from somebody else. So you have all kinds of ways that board members want to communicate and ways they don't want to communicate. But that doesn't change the fact that you have to have their involvement and you have to communicate with them. So normally, where I wouldn't send out an email just saying, hey, this is what's going on to our board, I do now, because there's so many things changing. You know, all of a sudden, we had companies giving us grants for the crisis funding and asking us to apply for it. And so all of a sudden, we've got this pot of money going to the agencies to feed and house people. And excuse me, then they need to know about that. And they need to okay that spending and the acceptance of that grant. So make sure you figure out a way to communicate with your board. Let me take a sip of water. That's one of the chemo side effects I don't have any control over. Okay, let's look at your clients. I guess I'm just going to pick on Family Success Center today, but a lot of nonprofits, you have grants that you have to fulfill. You have people that you need to talk to. And one of the ways that Tammy and Emma had to figure out to fulfill their grant was, if you don't have classes, how are you going to help families? So Emma or Tammy, you want to jump in and talk about how you fulfilled the needs of your clients when your office wasn't even open?
Well, I'll let Emma jump in here in just a minute, but we tried to think about communicating with people. So we started hosting, usually at Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock, we're hosting a conversation with our clients just to answer their questions and talk about the programs. But we can do a lot of things through Zoom, through FaceTime, through all those other platforms to still communicate and talk with people. You can exchange documents through email, or for a lot of people who are like, I don't have the ability to scan in what you need. Well, you can even take a photo of it with your phone and send that in. And so we had told our staff, if they were using their personal cell phone to do stuff with, checked with my husband, and you can *67 before you call somebody on your phone, and so they will not be able to see your personal cell phone number. Because I use my cell phone all the time, but mine is not primarily client-based, it's primary donor and board based that I do that. So I didn't want to make my staff reveal their personal cell phone numbers to every client that they serve. So there's things that you can do. So we're trying to hold classes, hold conversations. And so Emma, jump in here and talk about the classes and things we've been doing. Maybe we may have lost her. Emma?
Okay.
Yeah.
We can come back to that. I want to ask Kay Moore. Kay, if you'll unmute yourself, how was it that you decided you were going to communicate with all the when you weren't supposed to be meeting together? Are you on there, Kay? I see her muted. Okay. Anybody else want to go over how they communicated with their clients that was completely different than how they communicated before? Okay, we'll go on. The next thing that you need to talk about, the next group of people you need to communicate with is your stakeholders. Many of us that have grants from Children's Trust Fund example, they're school-based programs. Well, schools are closed. They're client-based classes. They're classes in your office. And the number one question for most of us is, am I still going to get my grant money if I do a school-based program and it's closed? Because you're looking at, do you have to furlough this employee or lay them off or whatever you want to call it in your organization? Do you have to let them go knowing when it comes back, you'll hire them back? But that's a big deal for people who all of a sudden are going to have to apply for unemployment. And and that's a big consideration, because if it's going to be 1 month, can you do other things? One of the things when we communicated with Children's Trust Fund is, you know, if you're doing one-on-one meetings instead of in-home visits, then you'll still get your your pay. So, and some with school-based programs, I don't know what they're doing. And so I don't know if they'll lose that funding. So you have to communicate with your stakeholders what's going on with that. Many times your stakeholders or your board will all of a sudden want to volunteer with you, and they'll want you to do volunteer efforts. One of the things we've seen with the COVID crisis is all of our corporate, not all of our corporate donors, but a big group of corporate donors that gave to United Way or sponsored United Way are saying, no, you can't have that sponsorship unless it goes to COVID. The corporate donation from big corporate donors to the campaign are saying all this is going to COVID. So if you're United Way or you're your agency and somebody that's providing you funding now says everything you do has to go to just this one thing, it can be very dangerous for your finances. And we'll talk about finances a little bit later on another slide. But one of the things that you need to do as a manager when you're talking about communication is with your employees, you have to give them the ability to be empowered to make decisions that are not normal. You also have to motivate them. We're often, if you're a people person in nonprofit, you're often motivated by other people. Penny, hey Jessica, hey, I got a great idea, let's do this. Well, when you're at home, you don't have that enthusiasm. You don't have that ability to go, hey, let's do this, or let's change this up. So you need to figure out a way for different employees, how to empower them, how to motivate them, and how are you going to measure what they accomplish if you can't even see them? How are you going to know that collectively you can get your work done, that you can get your work done? Many of us we don't work out on an island on projects. We do things together. We talk about what's working, not what's not working. Have you thought about this? Is that going to fit into our finances? And so as a manager or somebody that's over somebody in a crisis, you have to change the way that you motivate and empower people. And that's a pretty big, it's a pretty big part of thinking about managing is getting the work done and empowering people, because actually when you're at home, you're not consistently productive. None of us are. You might be really productive, for example, myself, from 6 to 7 a.m. I haven't even really gotten up out of the lounge chair. I'm drinking coffee, and I love to go through my email and my follow-ups for the day. Well, from 8 to 9 or 10, I'm not very productive, and I'm normally a very big morning person. But the last 8 months, mornings are not good, so I'm not productive during that time. Around lunchtime, 10 to 2, I'm very productive. Well, I'm not normally that productive around 11 to 1. Normally I'm going out to eat lunch with somebody. So you have to think about who's doing what in your continuity of operations. Let's go to the next slide, Will, and I'll talk about that. You have to think about, if somebody's got to stay at home because there's no daycare, when are they going to be productive? It might not be around lunchtime when I'm productive. They might be productive during nap time. And you can't change that. There's nothing you can do. You may have other people at home or other obligations when you're home during a COVID crisis that you're not any other time. Let's look next. Do we have any questions? That's the hard part about being online is people don't go, oh, I got a question, and unmute. When you talk about continuity of operations, you should have a continuity of operations plan already in place. Most of us in Gadsden think about continuity of operations if a tornado comes through and wipes us out. That's what ours is. I mean, it's not written, this is for tornadoes, but that's definitely our thought process through our whole continuity of operations. Because after the 2011 tornadoes in Tuscaloosa, it took out the Red Cross building, and both EMA offices were like, oh, we got to think about that. Where are we going to go? But this is different in the continuity of operations. You need to think about, in this crisis, what does your community expect you to do? What do you think the community expected United Way to do during the COVID crisis? They expected us to feed and house people. They expected us to take care of people in crisis. So what is your agency? What is your nonprofit expect you to do? What does the community expect your nonprofit to do during crisis? That's different for Kay at down Gadsden. It's different for Jessica at Gadsden State. What does the community expect you to do? You may not be expected to do anything during this crisis, but what if you're the Berry Center and you counsel children who have been abused and there's an increase of those cases? Do you think you just go home and stay there? No, the community and the DA, and they all expect you to go and interview that child whenever they tell you to. So you need to think about, for your nonprofit, what are your essential processes? What are your essential services that people are going to expect you to do? Your processes may be, what software do you need on your computer at home? Do you need to add Zoom, GoToMeeting, Microsoft Teams? And that the other one that Tammy was talking about, the mail server, you may not have any of that on your home computer, but you need to identify what data are you going to need to work at home. If Jessica's working at Gadsden State and she's working on the foundation, she may be at home and not have access to any of her donors, any of her recipients for scholarships. So how is she going to do that? And how's Gadsden State going to make sure she's expected to be productive at home, that she has the data that she needs? We don't like to share data over areas that we have no control of. You know, United has 5,000 donors. We don't want a database that's just out there for anybody to look at, because all your cell phones and emails and, you know, what you donate's on there. So you need to identify the software that you need and how you're, and can you email from your phone at home? Can you email from your computer if you're not used to doing that? Do you need your employees to have their phone and computer available at all times? So if the community expects you to do whatever they want you to do, then you need to be ready with your processes and your services. So they may expect, our community expects 211 on their game, no matter what. No matter if you, I mean, it doesn't matter if every 211 employee has the virus. What does the community expect? They expect us to answer the phone, right? So, and we are connected through a statewide system where we can go and say, hey, we're down today, take all our calls. But what if we didn't have that? You know, we're expected in Gadsden to answer our phone 8 to 4:30. And that better happen, because if your community loses faith in what they expect you to do, then your nonprofit is going to lose some of its credibility. So your processes and your services, that needs to be the things that you need to think about in your continuity of operations plan. Who all has a continuity of operations plan in your United Way? You can either chat it or you can unmute yourself. Marion Moore says, I haven't figured out how to unmute myself. Well, if you need a continuity of operations plan, we'll email you ours. What you have to do is let somebody at United Way know, and you can change it up, but we'll email that out to you, and you can just change up what you need to change on there. Also, if you go to, if you Google continuity of plans for nonprofits, you can get templates there too. There's several templates. I think ours came from United Way in Michigan, so we didn't reinvent the wheel on anything. But you do want to make sure you ID your process that you have to have. You know, what are your tools and your essential services. Some of your essential services will go away during a crisis, and others will be ramped up. 211 took 3 times the call volume the first several weeks during the crisis. You know, you couldn't take off if you're an employee. You don't have a day off during that. You got 3 times the call volume. And then sometimes you have to cry wolf and ask for help from, you know, other communities because the whole system was full of calls during that time. Does anybody have any examples that you want to talk about with community expectations that changed during this? I really thought y'all would be more talkative. Who had services that changed, either ramped up or ramped down during the virus?
I'll chime in for the chamber. I mean, clearly you can't have in-person events. So as much as we do with after hours and business and gravy, and for example, the chamber councils, we can't have those anymore right now. So I think Heather I think Heather's in the call. She said she said we definitely ramped up, and yes, we did, because I think she was pulling some reports, and we either delivered or served as a pass-through for about 60 webinars in just about a month. This is a period of a few weeks, about a month. So we've shifted from seeing each other and talking and networking and the handshaking to a lot of sharing information and getting our members and anybody else in the community we can the information they need, help they need, for resources right now. So it's definitely changed.
Yeah. One of the things that Kay said is she had Zoom meetings with retail merchants, and they have a closed group, and she communicates with restaurants by email. We also have one that says, Tammy said she had people that didn't want to hold on to an appointment by distance who have warmed up to the idea since it's lasted longer than they hoped for. So Tammy also says they're sending home the follow-up material and taking home packets. So
At 211, one of the things that we did to help some of our partner agencies with Etowah Baptist Missions, a lot of their volunteers are elderly, so their volunteers weren't able to work. And so Karen and Ashley would come in. And so what we would do at 211 is that we would take the name and the phone number and the need of that individual, and we would just correlate a list for the day. We would just, correlate that list. And at the end of the day, we would then email that over to Karen. And then the next day, then Karen would go through the list. She'd call the individuals. And then if she was able to assist, she set up a system wherein they would drive up. She would have the check already cut. She would walk out, let them sign the paper and give them the check, if they were providing rental assistance or something of that nature. So that's a little bit different in the way that we refer out, but we found that it was extremely successful. So that's something that we were doing that we don't typically do.
yeah. Lynn Curry at Darden says their pre-employment transition service classes that were offering in the schools, they just ended because the school was closed. And so that was, that's an important element of their work at Darden, is getting people transition, from school. So that was probably a pretty big deal. One of the things that really is difficult for some nonprofits is you have to be flexible in the crisis to change your job. And I'll give you an example. When our 211 had 3 times the call volume, Ruth is like, I need some help. And so Christy, who's in campaign, started answering phone calls after she was trained by Ruth to take 211. All the 211 system is VoIP, so you get online and all your calls are through your computer. But we had to have her answer phones. We had to have Success by 6, whose girlfriend gala was canceled. We had to have her start taking all the phone calls because our senior aides are not our employees. They belong to the senior aid program, and they weren't allowed to come to work. So all of a sudden we didn't have people to answer our phone. So Emily now has all the phone calls for United Way forwarded to her cell phone at her house. So people have to be flexible in their jobs. This is very difficult for a manager if you've got somebody who only wants to do what you hired them to do. Now, that doesn't happen a lot in nonprofits because most of our employees have a million different jobs anyway, but you have to be flexible in crisis. I know when my husband, before he was retired, during really bad storms, if you were in the marketing department, you automatically turned into logistics. You get hotel rooms, you get food, you get whatever the crews need to operate. And so that's really outside your, what you do every day, but your job changes like that. And so in planning your continuity of operations, all of your employees need to understand that. If we're in, for example, if we're in tornado crisis, we have staff, oftentimes Jessica, when she worked at United Way and Christie, they would go and all of a sudden they're assigned to tornado volunteer reception center until further notified. And so if you have a very flexible staff, it's really, really good. And some of the ways that you work change. I'll give you another power company example just because I'm more familiar with those. In a storm, those crew members just put up the poles and connect your power. They don't clean up all the debris around that pole. A lot of it. There's an old broken pole, there's old wire, old connectors, and they just leave it laying there. Then when they get the power on, they come back and clean up. Always. And that's the protocol. And normally we all clean up as we go, kind of like McDonald's, but during crisis, you may not be able to do that. You may not be able to clean up as you go. You may have to change. And that's another way your employees need to be very flexible. Because if you've got somebody that's all of a sudden reassigned to something else, then somebody else has to pick up the slack for you and come back and clean up. And they just need to understand that. Now, I've not met a lot of nonprofit employees that are not flexible, but I have met my share. And most of the time, they don't last very long in our offices when they can't be flexible. So that's continuity of operations. Anybody have any comments or questions? I'll try to look at the chat. Emma said she had financial stability counseling, didn't have a lot for the YMCA, but she had a big increase in budget counselors. We've been referring tornado victims now for budget counseling to Emma. Let's go to the next slide and look at finances. This is probably the scariest for all of us. And if you rely on donations, which we all do in this sector, how are you going to handle that if you lose a lot? When Goodyear closed, we had just lost 18% of the dollars, had just had to cut the agencies. Then this happens and our corporate givers say, you know, anything we give you, you have to spend on COVID. So, you know, that doesn't help the Berry Center or Family Success Center or the YMCA. That doesn't help them, you know, if they're not funded. So you have to look at your finances as a whole. Can you do your banking online? Can you, you know, if you can't go into the bank and you can only do the drive-through, is that going to affect how you operate? I don't know for your agency. We do remote deposit, so things just kind of carry on. But online banking can be different from that are not used to doing that. Do you know your passwords for online banking? One of the things that happened at our office was our new finance manager last year job, and she had a very good offer, and Donna came back to fill in until we rehire that position, which we've just decided. And she said, look, let's just don't worry about rehiring until this is kind of all over with. But all the passwords had been changed and she couldn't get into the bank accounts. Well, if I'm at home, I don't have a password list at home. I can't help her. So we've got to go to the office and we got to make sure we can do online banking. One of the most difficult parts of financing for nonprofits is your reserve. How many people on this call have a 3-month reserve that you can operate on? And I'll wait for people to type in or unmute themselves.
Hey, Joan, it's Kay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
I'm trying to unmute myself on my phone and not on the computer. That was my problem. But
Yeah,
I have a 3-month reserve, but I don't, with what you're talking about, with the cuts that we anticipate coming, that's going to dwindle fairly quickly, I'm afraid.
I think so too, Kay. I do too. Darden says they have a 3-month reserve. Now, United Way is required to keep a reserve. It's part of our United Way worldwide requirements. But it's like Kay says, if we have a reserve and Goodyear closes and the campaign goes down, you can't give through payroll deduct if you're not working, right? You can't. If you're a business owner and you make your donation. So those reserves come in handy. Now, for nonprofits, 15 or 20 years ago, you were not encouraged to keep reserves, were you? Because everybody thought, well, I'm not going to give to this agency if they've got $100,000 in the bank or $150,000 or $200,000 in the bank. That is no longer valid and it's no longer true. We want agencies to keep a reserve because of times like this. And I'll give you another example of the Berry Center. I hope I don't mind sharing. They were in a small house in East Gadsden and desperately needed a different location and a bigger place. They were doing a lot of counseling, and people were meeting each other, coming and going in that little house. And so they came to us and said, look, we don't really have a reserve, but we're going to be able to build up some because we're doing extra fundraisers that we're going to put aside for this. And so she said, I want to make sure that's not going to affect United Way funding when you see that in our finances, we have a savings. And I'm like, no, we want you to have that. We want you to have that reserve in case you need a building or you have tornado damage or you have, a Goodyear situation or COVID situation. So I want your nonprofits to really change the mindset of your board and yourself that yes, you do need a reserve. You're not going to build up a reserve in times like today right now. I mean, you're talking about putting a little bit away for a long time until you build that up. And it's not going to be something that's going to happen soon, but you need to start that right away. It's always like you tell your kids, it's not that you're going to save for college in one day. You're going to save for college over 18 years for that child. You're going to save for something that you want to have over a good long while. Hopefully it won't take you 18 years to build up a 3-month reserve, but you really need to be working on that because in times like this, we're going to need that reserve. I can tell you right now. The last thing I want to mention about finances is the security of your finances. And we talked about that a second ago under passwords and deposits, but you want to make sure your finances are secure if you start doing things that are out of the ordinary, and that's different for every agency. So that's another thing that you need to think about. Will, let's change slides to the next one. The next thing you need to do when you manage the crisis is you need to decide how you're going to return to normal. We're not going to return to any kind of normal that was before. We're going to, and we say this in disaster and tornadoes all the time, you're going to return to the new normal. So the things that you're going to think about, and we need to be thinking about this right now. Now, the chamber came back to work Monday. They're not open to the public, but they're in their offices. So what day are you going to do that? When you do that, how are your employees going to work if you have employees that work right beside each other? A lot of you have offices for everybody, and that's fine, and you can do that. Some people don't. Some people work in open areas. But what day are you going to open? What restrictions? Are you going to open before you open to, are you going to open to employees before you open for the public? You need to communicate this with your employees all the time. What are you thinking about? What are you thinking? The last 2 staff meetings we had with United Way, and we're trying to meet on the computer like every other day or every 3rd day to just talk about what's going on. We talk about what day are we going to open? What day are we going to return without opening to the public? So that communication goes a long way. And your board needs to be involved too. Remember I told you our board, when we were working in the office separated, they went, no, close. And so now I'm thinking I need to get with the board members and talk about opening up before we decide and we let everybody know. So board involvement is a new board involvement, and your transition is something different that you don't normally work on. And communication is the key in this too. And I will tell you, it's going to be hard for your employees to go from working at home back to the office 8 to 4:30. It's going to be hard because, there's a lot of freedom in me working 6 to 7, taking an hour off at 8 or 9 to go take my bath and get dressed and come back and work. I can't do that if I'm at the office. So this transition is going to be hard for employees and employers as we get back to this new normal. You may have employees that still are reassigned to a different job when you go back to work. And everybody on this call right now, I guarantee you, is just thinking, I just wanted to go back to the way it was. I just wanted to go back to the way we were. I knew how to operate. I knew how to work. I know what's expected of me. And that may not be true during the transition. I think one of the things that might be good for your staff is for you to celebrate that transition back to the office. to celebrate maybe what people learned that they didn't know before because they had a new assignment. Celebrate that you just made it. And that might help in those milestones to kind of go from working at home to working at the office, is that little milestone celebration. It doesn't have to be a lot. And you might want to let your employees celebrate what they learned through the transition, what they would do differently. It's almost like when United Way finishes any event, we do a debrief on things that we learned, things that we would change, things that we would do differently, things that we loved that we did that we didn't think we would. And I encourage you to debrief when you are back in your office, even if you're not sitting close to each other. You need to talk about that when after it's kind of over, that transition is. Your board expectations for transition is important, and I've told this a million times today. Communicate. You've got to communicate with your board. Jessica Brown says she hopes that she remembers how to iron work clothes. I think that's true for all of us. I don't know that they're going to let me wear to work what I wear at home every day. I don't think that's possible. And many of us are only dressed for the waist up anyway on all these calls. So those are just some things that that I want you to think about. On that next page, I think I've got some more information on more board work. Will? The other thing that I wanted to bring up again with the work of the board is there are state laws about your board meetings. You can do Zoom, you can do GoToMeeting, but the law says you have to be able to have a discussion. That's why you can't use email votes for the final vote of the board. You might, and I do this all the time, I'll gauge the interest and the vote of the board by email, but that you can't use that as the final vote. You have to ratify that in the next board meeting, because you have to have a way to communicate. That's why on a Zoom or GoToMeeting, you can do that for board work, because people have the opportunity to ask questions, to chime in, to vote or not vote, and you get the opportunity to actually talk to people. So that you may need to look at your bylaws, and I'm going to refer you to your bylaws to see what they say about your meetings. I guarantee there's nobody in this room that has a lot of information in their bylaws on their virtual meetings, because we've never had to do that before. Best practices for virtual meetings. How many of you all have gotten in a meeting and everybody talks at once and you can't hear anybody? Everybody has.
Absolutely.
It's so frustrating. Let me take a break here because Heather New just did an announcement on the chat. We have an exciting announcement that we've received a contribution from Gadsden City Council to subscribe for 1 year to Foundation Center. It's a great tool that lets nonprofits search for grant opportunities beginning May 15th. We accept appointments. That is a really cool thing. We did that one morning at United Way. It was really cool. The foundation gave us one morning, and it's expensive to purchase that, so that's really good. Going back to virtual meetings, it's hard for people who have never done virtual meetings on your board to feel comfortable to unmute and chime in. You all have unmuted very little today to chime in, and so you can imagine a board who might not quite know what's going on. It's hard for them to do this too. And don't forget, your board members, if they are in business, they've got their own crisis going on right now. Our board members are in businesses where they've laid off people, where they don't have a job, where they're closed. They've got their own crisis going on, and so they may not be able to just do anything at your whim. And we need to be aware of our board members in that. So the other thing I want you to do is make sure your employees are okay. If they're all of a sudden at home without daycare with a baby, and you're requiring them to have something to do, if they are all of a sudden caring for a parent, or have a parent in a nursing home that they can't even make sure they're okay, and think about the people that have family members in hospitals that they cannot go see. My daughter-in-law just had a baby 3 weeks ago and was hospitalized, and my son could not go in to see her. They had very limited restrictions on going in to see the baby, and that is stressful. And it's stressful for families. If you just got somebody in the hospital and you can't go in there and see them, I can't imagine that scenario. And we've got that going on right here. So make sure your staff is okay and your board is okay, and that you're being flexible. I think that every time we go through something like this, it's easier to go back and go, well, the next time I'm going to know better, and we will be better, because there's many things at probably all of our nonprofits and certainly at United Way that we may think about that we didn't think about this time around. So every disaster is different. Every virus or pandemic is going to be different. Every tornado is going to be different. Every Goodyear closing, your largest employer in your community, is going to be different. But we certainly have so few number of opportunities in crisis to be able to manage effectively and efficiently and to carry on the mission of our organization, which is what all of us are charged to do, to carry on the mission. So do you all have any questions or comments before we finish up?
Good
Y'all have
job,
been
Joan.
awfully quiet today.
Hey,
Yes.
Joan, good job. Good job.
Oh.
Glad to see you finally again. You're looking great. Love your
Yeah.
hair.
Thank you. Yeah, I fixed it just for y'all today.
That's right. Thank you. Great job,
I
Joan.
asked a friend of mine who, when they finished chemo, how long hair to come back, and they said like 4 to 6 months. And so I guess y'all will see me like this for a while. Whew. For something to go back to normal in my body. But I am very thankful. Any other comments or questions?
I see a lot of comments over here. Looks like.
There are comments. Now, can everybody can read the comments, Will?
Yeah, those are being posted to everyone.
Okay, good. Because Leslie's got a comment there. Hey, Emily. Any other questions or comments? Well, I've enjoyed being with everybody today, even though you all didn't talk to me today. I really thought you would. I thought you'd have a lot to say and a lot of comments, but it's certainly good to be among all of my friends today and colleagues, and I've missed you terribly. I've missed the community terribly. And my husband, who is definitely an introvert, said, this hasn't been bad for the past, because we've really been quarantined since last September with all this. It really hasn't been bad, has it? And I'm like, oh gosh, I need to get out and talk to somebody. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Absolutely. Well, Joan, thank you so much for taking the time this morning to present. Thank you all for tuning into the call this morning. Again, this was all being recorded, so you can find it later today after I download it. It'll be on our COVID-19 page. So make sure, if you have any fellow friends in the nonprofit world, locally or statewide, nationally, wherever it may be, feel free to share this with them, anybody you want to. But I'll stop with the recording right now.